The morning sun pushed through the windows of Joey's diner, casting warm squares of light across the checkered floor. Elena Martinez had been coming here every Saturday morning for the past 15 years. The waitresses knew her order by heart: black coffee, no sugar, and wheat toast with a side of jam. What they didn't know was that this quiet woman in her faded blue jeans and old cardigan sweater made decisions that shaped the entire country. Elena sipped her coffee slowly, enjoying these precious hours when she could just be herself. No formal robes, no clerks rushing around her, no reporters analyzing her every word. At the diner, she wasn't Justice Martinez of the Supreme Court. She was just Ellie, the kind lady who left good tips and read the newspaper front to back. "More coffee, Ellie?" asked Rita, the waitress who had been serving her for years. "Just half a cup, thanks," Eleanor replied with a warm smile. "How's your grandson doing with those college applications?" Rita beamed. "He got accepted to state, first in our family to go to college." "That's wonderful news," Eleanor said, genuinely happy for her. These small connections, these glimpses into ordinary lives. This was what kept her grounded, what reminded her of the real impact of the laws she helped interpret. The bell above the door jingled, and 3 young men walked in. They wore expensive suits that seemed out of place in the humble diner. Their voices carried across the room as they took the table next to Eleanor's. "I can't believe we're prepping for the Supreme Court next week," said the tallest one, adjusting his designer glasses. "The firm is counting on us to nail this environmental case." "Did you see the brief from the opposition?" asked another, his gold watch flashing as he gestured. "Total amateur hour. They don't stand a chance against us." The third man laughed. "And that Justice Martinez who's leading the case. My professor said she's so by the book, she probably sleeps with the Constitution under her pillow." They all laughed loudly, completely unaware that the subject of their joke was sitting just 3 feet away, hidden behind her newspaper. Eleanor felt a small twinge of amusement, if only they knew. But their voices kept getting louder, disrupting the peaceful atmosphere of the diner. Other customers were starting to glance over with annoyed expressions. "Excuse me," Eleanor finally said, lowering her newspaper. "Would you mind keeping it down a bit? Some of us are trying to enjoy a quiet breakfast." The 3 lawyers turned to look at her. Their expressions shifted from surprise to dismissal in seconds as they took in her appearance, the wrinkles around her eyes, the simple clothes, the unpolished nails. "Sorry if our important conversation is bothering you," said the one with the designer glasses, not sounding sorry at all. "We're preparing for a major Supreme Court case. Lives and livelihoods are at stake. Maybe find somewhere else to sit if you don't like hearing about important matters, ma'am," another added with a condescending smile. The third looked her up and down. "This is a public place, and we're discussing public affairs. Maybe you prefer the senior center down the street. They keep the volume down there." Eleanor raised her eyebrows slightly. In her courtroom, these men would never dare speak to her this way. But here, without her robes and title, they saw only an aging woman they could easily dismiss. "I understand the importance of Supreme Court cases quite well," she said calmly. "And proper preparation usually involves discretion, not broadcasting your strategy to an entire diner." The men exchanged amused glances. "No offense, but this is complex legal stuff," said the one with the gold watch. "Don't worry about it. You probably think the Supreme Court is just a brand of sour cream or something." Their laughter stung, but Eleanor had faced far worse in her journey to the highest court in the land. She simply smiled, returned to her newspaper, and made a mental note of the law firm name mentioned on their documents. As she paid her bill, she overheard them criticizing the Supreme Court's decision to take on the case, calling Justice Martinez specifically an out-of-touch academic who doesn't understand real-world implications. Little did they know they would be standing before her in just 2 days, arguing the biggest case of their careers. Elena left an extra-large tip for Rita and walked out into the sunshine, already thinking about how Monday morning would unfold. Elena didn't let the young lawyer's comments ruin her weekend. After leaving Joey's diner, she spent Saturday afternoon working in her small garden, the feel of soil between her fingers washing away the morning's unpleasantness. On Sunday, she visited her sister Beth and played board games with her nieces and nephews. Not once did she mention the encounter or her upcoming case. Family time was sacred. another boundary she had learned to keep over her 20 years on the bench. Monday morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill. Elena woke at 5 a.m., as she always did on court days. She followed her usual routine: 30 minutes of yoga, a light breakfast, and then the transformation. Gone were the comfortable jeans and worn sweater. In their place came the carefully pressed black suit, the pearl earrings her mother had given her when she passed the bar exam, and the formal shoes that pinched her toes but looked appropriately serious. Her driver, Tom, picked her up at 7:30 sharp. He had worked for her for over a decade, but still insisted on calling her Justice Martinez, despite her many requests to use her first name. "Big case today?" Tom asked, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "They're all big to someone," Eleanor replied with a small smile. The Supreme Court building stood tall and proud against the morning sky. Eleanor never tired of looking at it: the massive columns, the words "Equal Justice Under Law" carved in stone above the entrance. Sometimes she still couldn't believe that a girl who grew up in a tiny apartment above her parents' corner store now walked these hallowed halls. Her chambers were quiet when she arrived. Her clerks knew not to schedule anything in the hour before court. This was her time to center herself, to remember the weight of the responsibility she carried. Elena sat at her desk, reviewing her notes one last time. The case today involved an environmental dispute between a large corporation and a small coastal town. The corporation wanted to build a factory that would bring jobs but might threaten local wildlife. The town had won in lower courts, but the corporation had appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. It wasn't a headline-grabbing case, but its outcome would affect how similar disputes were handled for decades to come. At 9:45, her assistant knocked softly on the door. "It's time, Justice Martinez." Elena nodded, stood up, and slipped on the black robe that hung behind her door. The transformation was complete. No one looking at her now would mistake her for anything other than what she was: one of the 9 most powerful judges in the country. She joined her colleagues in the robing room, where they exchanged brief pleasantries before filing into the courtroom at precisely 10 a.m. The familiar call rang out: "The Honorable, the Chief Justice, and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States." Oyez, oyez, oyez. Eleanor took her seat and surveyed the packed courtroom. And there they were, in the front row, looking nervous but excited, the 3 young men from the diner. They hadn't noticed her yet. They were too busy arranging their notes and whispering last-minute strategies to each other. The Chief Justice called the case, and the 3 lawyers approached the podium. Only then, as they looked up at the bench, did their eyes meet hers. Helena watched as recognition dawned on their faces, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally horror as they realized who she was. The tallest one, the one with the designer glasses who had suggested she go to the senior center, actually stumbled slightly. The one with the gold watch turned so pale that Eleanor momentarily worried he might faint. The third one's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For just a brief moment, Eleanor allowed herself to enjoy their shock. Then she arranged her face into the neutral expression she had perfected over years on the bench. Whatever personal satisfaction she might feel at this moment of revelation, she had a job to do. These young men might have been rude, but every case deserved her full attention and fairness. "Counsel," she said, her voice clear and professional, "you may begin your argument." The tallest lawyer, Alex, cleared his throat 3 times before he could speak. His voice, so confident and booming at the diner, now squeaked like a rusty door. "Good morning, Your Honors," he began, his hands visibly shaking as he arranged his papers. His eyes kept darting back to Justice Martinez, looking for any sign of anger or revenge in her expression. But Eleanor's face remained professional and unreadable. The other justices noticed something was off. Justice Thompson, who had served alongside Eleanor for 15 years, raised an eyebrow at the young lawyer's unusual nervousness. It wasn't uncommon for attorneys to be anxious before the Supreme Court, but these 3 looked like they had seen a ghost. "Mr. Chen," the Chief Justice said, "we've read your briefs. Please focus your argument on why we should overturn the lower court's ruling on the environmental impact assessment." Alex nodded too quickly and launched into his prepared speech, but the words seemed to jumble in his mouth. He kept losing his place, forgetting key points, and twice referred to a precedent case by the wrong name. Behind him, his colleagues weren't doing much better. Pete, the one with the gold watch, was frantically flipping through their notes, searching for backup arguments as their carefully planned presentation fell apart. The third lawyer, Daniel, had developed a nervous tic, tapping his pen against his leg so loudly that the Chief Justice had to ask him to stop. Elena waited patiently, letting her colleagues ask the first round of questions. Justice Lee pressed Alex on the scientific evidence, while Justice Washington challenged the economic claims. Finally, it was Eleanor's turn to speak. "Counsel," she said calmly, her voice exactly the same as when she had asked them to quiet down at the diner, "your brief argues that the environmental concerns are, and I quote, overblown hysteria from local residents who don't understand progress. Yet the independent studies submitted to the lower court indicate real risks to the coastal wetlands. Could you explain this discrepancy?" Alex's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. He recognized her tone immediately. The same reasonable voice that had politely asked them to lower their voices, the voice they had dismissed and mocked. "Justice Martinez," he stammered, "we believe, that is, the company's own research suggests." "Your own research," Eleanor repeated, leaning forward slightly. "Conducted by scientists employed by your client, correct?" "Yes, but—" "And did you review the methodology of these studies personally?" "Well, no, but our experts assure us. Just as you were assured that I wouldn't understand complex legal stuff." Eleanor asked, her voice still professional but with the slightest edge. A hush fell over the courtroom. The other justices looked confused by her comment, but they were too disciplined to ask about it during oral arguments. Alex looked like he might faint. "Your Honor, we—" Eleanor moved on smoothly. "Let's discuss the economic impact projections on page 42 of your brief." For the next 15 minutes, Eleanor questioned the lawyers with laser precision. She didn't need to be unfair or harsh. Their arguments were already weak, and their nervousness made them weaker. With each question, she dismantled another part of their case, exposing flaws in their reasoning that they had never considered. By the time her questioning ended, all three lawyers were sweating profusely. The other justices followed her lead, picking apart what remained of their arguments until there was almost nothing left. What should have been their career-making moment had turned into a professional nightmare. When the Chief Justice finally announced the end of their time, the three lawyers practically stumbled away from the podium. As the attorneys for the town took their place, Alex, Pete, and Daniel huddled together in panic. "She remembers us," Pete whispered, looking pale and sick. "Did you see how she looked at us when she mentioned what we said about complex legal stuff?" "We're finished," Daniel moaned quietly. "Absolutely finished. She's going to destroy us professionally." Alex shook his head in disbelief. "The simple woman from the diner is Justice Eleanor Martinez. How could we have been so stupid?" As they whispered among themselves, they didn't notice Eleanor watching them thoughtfully. Unlike what they feared, she wasn't plotting their destruction. She was remembering herself at their age, talented but arrogant, in need of a lesson in humility that had fortunately come early in her career. Perhaps these young men deserved the same opportunity to learn and grow. The rest of the morning session dragged on like a bad dream for Alex, Pete, and Daniel. They'd barely heard the town's lawyer present her arguments, too consumed by their own impending doom. When the Chief Justice announced a 1-hour lunch recess, the three men stumbled out of the courtroom like sleepwalkers. "What do we do now?" Daniel asked as they huddled in a quiet corner of the massive building. "Call the firm and confess." Pete shook his head. "And tell them what?" "That we insulted a Supreme Court justice days before arguing in front of her. That we told her to go to a senior center. They'll fire us on the spot." "Maybe we should just run," Alex suggested, only half joking. "Change our names. Move to another country. I hear Canada has nice law firms." A tall woman in a formal suit approached them, their steps echoing on the marble floor. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I'm Lisa Patel, Justice Martinez's clerk. The justice would like to see you in her chambers." The three exchanged terrified glances. This was it, the end of their careers before they had truly begun. "Now?" Alex squeaked. "Yes, now," Lisa replied, her expression giving nothing away. "Follow me, please." The walk to Justice Martinez's chambers felt like a death march. They passed portraits of former justices, stern faces seeming to judge them from their frames. When they reached the heavy wooden door with a simple plaque reading Justice Eleanor Martinez, Lisa knocked twice before opening it. "The attorneys from Goldstein and Baker, Your Honor," she announced, then stepped aside to let them enter. Justice Martinez's chambers were not what they expected. Instead of an imposing, intimidating space, the room felt almost cozy. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not just with law books but novels and biographies. Family photos sat on her desk alongside a small plant and a mug that read "World's Best Aunt." The justice herself sat behind her desk, still in her black robe, but somehow looking more human than she had on the bench. "Gentlemen," she said calmly, "please sit down." They obeyed, perching on the edge of their chairs like birds ready to fly at the first sign of danger. "I believe we've met before," Justice Martinez continued, her voice level. "At Joey's dinner, Saturday morning." Alex found his voice first. "Your Honor, we can't begin to apologize enough for our behavior. We didn't know." Justice Martinez held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "And if you had known, would you have treated me differently because of my title? Because that's not actually better, just more strategic." The three men looked at each other, confused. This wasn't the scolding they had expected. "I didn't ask you here for apologies," she continued. "I asked you here because your arguments today showed potential, but they were undermined by the same arrogance you displayed on Saturday." Pete swallowed hard. Are you going to report us to our firm?" A ghost of a smile crossed Justice Martinez's face. "And say what? That you were rude to a stranger in a diner? That's not against the law, just against common decency." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Do you know what makes a truly great lawyer? It's not just intelligence or knowledge of the law. It's empathy, the ability to understand people from all walks of life." She turned back to face them. "Today, your arguments focused entirely on corporate interests and economic benefits. You dismissed environmental concerns as hysteria and referred to the townspeople as obstacles to progress. You spoke about them the same way you spoke to me, as if they couldn't possibly understand what was best for them." Daniel looked down at his hands. "We thought we were prepared." "You were prepared to argue the law," Justice Martinez agreed. "But you weren't prepared to understand the people the law affects. That diner where we met? I go there every Saturday because it keeps me connected to real people with real lives, the very people who are affected by the decisions we make in that courtroom." For the first time, the three lawyers really looked at Justice Martinez, not as a threat to their careers or as an imposing legal figure, but as a person who had wisdom to share. "So what happens now?" Alex asked quietly. Justice Martinez checked her watch. "Now you have 30 minutes left of your lunch break. I suggest you use it to rethink your afternoon arguments. Focus less on dismissing the town's concerns and more on addressing them. Show the court you understand what's really at stake for both sides." The three lawyers stumbled out of Justice Martinez's chambers in a daze. They found an empty conference room and collapsed into chairs around the table, their expensive suits now wrinkled and damp with nervous sweat. "Did that really just happen?" Daniel asked, loosening his tie. "She didn't destroy us. She's helping us." Alex ran his hands through his hair. "We've been looking at this all wrong. The case, the town, everything." Pete checked his gold watch. They had 25 minutes left before court reconvened. "We need to completely rethink our afternoon strategy. The environmental impact isn't just some technical hurdle to overcome. Those wetlands matter to the people who live there." They spread their notes across the table and began furiously rewriting their arguments. Gone were phrases like negligible environmental concerns and overly cautious local regulations. Instead, they acknowledged the legitimate worries of the townspeople while proposing stronger safeguards and community oversight. Back in the courtroom, the afternoon session began with the justices asking follow-up questions to both sides. When it was the young lawyer's turn again, they approached the podium with a new humility that was obvious to everyone in the room. "Your Honors," Alex began, his voice steadier than before. "After careful reflection, we'd like to clarify some points from our morning arguments." The other justices looked surprised at this unusual approach, but Justice Martinez's expression remained neutral. While our client is committed to bringing jobs to the region, we recognize that environmental protections aren't obstacles to progress, but essential safeguards for the community's future. We're proposing additional monitoring systems that exceed federal requirements and a community advisory board with real power to pause operations if concerns arise. As Alex continued, Pete and Daniel watched the justice's reactions carefully. Justice Washington nodded slightly at the mention of community involvement. Justice Lee seemed interested in the enhanced monitoring systems, and Justice Martinez, though her face remained professional, had the tiniest hint of approval in her eyes. The questioning that followed was still challenging, but different from the morning session. Instead of trying to expose flaws in their argument, the justices seemed to be pushing them toward better solutions. When Justice Martinez spoke, her questions guided them toward considering both the town's environment and its economy as interconnected issues. Your client's factory would become part of this community, she said. What long-term commitments are they willing to make to ensure they remain good neighbors for decades, not just until profits decline? This time, Alex was ready. Your Honor, we're prepared to propose a 20-year commitment to the region, including a community development fund, separate from tax obligations and scholarships for local students pursuing environmental science degrees. By the time the session ended, the three lawyers felt exhausted but strangely energized. They had no idea if they'd won their case. Supreme Court decisions typically came months later, but they knew they'd given their best arguments in the end. As the court adjourned, Justice Martinez gathered her papers without looking at them. But as she stood to leave, she paused, caught Alex's eye briefly, and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Outside on the Supreme Court steps, reporters surrounded them, asking for comments on the case. Their firm had warned them to stick to prepared statements, but Pete stepped forward and spoke from the heart. Today taught us that good law isn't just about clever arguments. It's about understanding the real people and communities affected by these decisions. That evening, they sat in a quiet bar near their hotel, ties loosened, jackets draped over chairs. "Do you think we still have jobs tomorrow?" Daniel asked, staring into his glass. "I have no idea," Alex replied honestly. "But I do know we're better lawyers today than we were yesterday." Pete's phone buzzed with an incoming email. He read it silently, then looked up with wide eyes. It's from the senior partner. Apparently, Justice Martinez called the firm. The other two froze, waiting for the bad news. She told him our recovery in the afternoon session showed exceptional growth and adaptability, and that we demonstrated an admirable capacity to learn from mistakes. They all exhaled at once. "There's more," Pete continued, reading directly from the email. "Justice Martinez suggested your firm consider establishing a pro bono program focused on environmental justice in underserved communities. She believes these three associates would be excellent candidates to lead such an initiative. Guys, we're not fired. We're being put in charge of something." The three looked at each other, stunned by the turn of events. Justice Martinez hadn't just taught them a lesson, she'd given them a chance to be better. 3 months passed before the Supreme Court issued its ruling on the case. During that time, Alex, Pete, and Daniel threw themselves into creating the firm's new environmental justice program. They worked long hours, reaching out to community organizations and studying successful models from other firms. On a rainy Tuesday morning, the decision finally came down. The court had ruled 7-2 in favor of the town, with Justice Martinez writing the majority opinion. The corporation would be allowed to build its factory, but only with significantly enhanced environmental protections and community oversight, many of the same provisions the young lawyers had proposed in their revised arguments. "She quoted us," Pete said in disbelief as they read through the opinion in their shared office. "Right here on page 12, she directly quoted our afternoon argument about community advisory boards." Alex nodded slowly. "Not just quoted us, she built on what we said. Took it further than we even thought to go." The senior partner called them in that afternoon. Gray-haired and imposing, Howard Goldstein rarely spoke directly to junior associates. But today he wanted to see them personally. "Normally, losing a Supreme Court case would be a black mark on your records," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "But somehow you three have turned this into a win for the firm." Justice Martinez's opinion mentions Goldstein and Baker 4 times, always positively. Daniel couldn't help but smile. We had a good teacher, sir. Howard raised an eyebrow but didn't ask what he meant. The client was initially upset about losing, of course, but your proposed compromises made it into the final ruling, which means their project can still move forward. They've decided to keep us on as counsel through the construction phase. He handed them each a folder. These are your new assignments. You'll continue leading the pro bono initiative, but with actual resources now. And you'll each take point on different aspects of the factory project, making sure our client complies with the court's requirements. As they left Howard's office, they couldn't believe how much had changed in just a few months. What had started as the worst day of their careers had somehow put them on a better path. That evening, they decided to celebrate at a small restaurant near their office. As they clinked glasses, Pete suddenly froze, staring at the door. "Don't look now," he whispered, but Justice Martinez just walked in. The other two immediately turned to look, making Pete sigh. "Really supple, guys." Justice Martinez was with another woman who appeared to be her sister. They had the same eyes and smile. They were seated at a table across the room, laughing and talking like any other dinner guests. "Should we say something?" Daniel asked nervously. Alex thought for a moment. Yes, but not as lawyers. As people who learned something important. They waited until Justice Martinez's sister went to the restroom, then approached her table. She looked up, surprised but not displeased to see them. "Justice Martinez," Alex began, "we don't want to interrupt your dinner, but we wanted to thank you. Not just for not destroying our careers," Pete added quickly, "though we're grateful for that too. But for teaching us something no one else had bothered to," Daniel finished, "about what it really means to be a good lawyer." Justice Martinez smiled, a real smile, not the careful, measured expression she wore in court. "I'm glad to hear that. How is your environmental justice program going?" They told her about their progress, the communities they were beginning to work with, the differences they hoped to make. She listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions. As they prepared to leave, Justice Martinez said, "You know, I wasn't much older than you when a judge called me out for similar arrogance. Judge Thompson, he's now my colleague on the bench." She smiled at the memory. "He didn't let me off easy, but he did give me a second chance. Sometimes that's all we need to find a better way forward." Alex nodded. "We won't waste the chance you gave us." "I know you won't," she replied. "I've read your proposals for the Community Advisory Board. Very impressive work." As they walked back to their table, Daniel suddenly laughed. "I just realized we're probably the only associates at our firm who can say a Supreme Court justice is following our careers. And probably the only ones who told a Supreme Court justice to go to a senior center," Pete added with a groan. "Let's focus on the present, not the past," Alex suggested, raising his glass again, "to second chances and making the most of them." 6 months later, on a crisp Saturday morning, Justice Eleanor Martinez pushed open the door to Joey's Diner. The bell jingled above her head, a familiar sound that always made her smile. She wore her usual weekend outfit, comfortable jeans, a soft sweater, and practical shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face was free of makeup. "Morning, Ellie," called Rita from behind the counter. "The usual." Elena nodded and headed for her regular corner table. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns across the checkered floor. She unfolded her newspaper and settled in for her peaceful Saturday ritual. The bell jingled again. Elena didn't look up at first, absorbed in an article about the local school board. But then she heard familiar voices and glanced toward the door. Alex, Pete, and Daniel stood just inside the entrance, scanning the diner. They weren't wearing expensive suits today, just casual clothes like everyone else. When they spotted Eleanor, they hesitated for a moment, then approached a table. "Good morning, Justice Martinez," Alex said, his voice respectful but not nervous like it had been months ago. "Do you mind if we join you?" Eleanor studied their faces. The arrogance she'd seen that first day was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful. She gestured to the empty chairs. "Please do." As they settled in, Rita brought Eleanor's black coffee and wheat toast. "Can I get anything for you fellas?" she asked. They ordered coffee and breakfast, then an awkward silence fell over the table. "This isn't a coincidence, is it?" Eleanor finally asked, folding her newspaper. Pete shook his head. "No, Your Honor. We wanted to show you something, and we thought this would be the right place. Please, we're in a diner on Saturday morning. Eleanor is fine, she said. Daniel smiled and pulled some papers from his messenger bag. These are the final plans for the Coastal Factory project. Construction starts next month. Eleanor looked over the documents with interest. The plans showed extensive wetland protections, solar panels covering the roof, and a community education center on the property. The company actually thanked us, Alex explained. Their new design has won environmental awards before breaking ground. It's becoming a model for responsible industrial development. And this, Pete added, sliding another document across the table, is what we're most proud of. Eleanor picked up the glossy brochure. On the cover was a photo of a group of young people in a classroom setting. The title read, Community Legal Advocates Program, Empowering Underserved Communities to Protect Their Environment. It's a 10-week course we developed, Daniel explained. We teach basic environmental law to community members who can't afford lawyers. They learn how to read environmental impact statements, file comments on proposed developments, and advocate for their neighborhoods. The firm has committed to funding it for at least 5 years, Alex added. We just finished our first class last month, 23 graduates from neighborhoods across the city. Eleanor flipped through the brochure, genuinely impressed. This goes beyond what I suggested. Pete nodded. We realized that teaching people to advocate for themselves creates more lasting change than just doing pro bono cases for them. And honestly, Daniel added, we're learning as much from them as they are from us. These community members understand things about their neighborhoods that we never could from behind our desks. Eleanor smiled. That's the lesson I hoped you'd learn. The law doesn't exist in a vacuum. It affects real people's lives. They talked through breakfast, discussing cases and communities, challenges and solutions. Not as a Supreme Court justice and attorneys, but as people who cared about making the legal system work better for everyone. As they were finishing, Alex looked around the diner. I can see why you come here every week. It reminds you what's real. Eleanor nodded. That's exactly it. When the bill came, they all reached for it at once. Please, Pete said, let us get this. It's the least we can do. Eleanor studied their faces, no longer the entitled young men who had mocked her, but thoughtful professionals who had learned a valuable lesson. All right, but next time, it's my treat. Next time? Daniel asked, surprised. Why not? Eleanor replied, I think we all have more to learn from each other. As they walked out into the sunshine together, Eleanor realized that sometimes the most important work of justice happened not in grand courtrooms, but in small diners, quiet conversations, and changed minds. And that was something worth coming back for, week after week.